Good evening, and thank you so much for being with us here tonight. My name is Imani Rupert Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for Affinity Community Services. We serve the entire LGBTQ community with an emphasis on Black LGBTQ women. I'm so excited to be here with Kelly Suzanne Salisbury. Kelly is the Director of Policy and Outreach at the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. It's Friday.
It's Friday. It's a mouthful.
And she also hosts our monthly video podcast at Affinity, and it's entitled Living Room Chats, hosted by Kelly Suzanne Salisbury. And although it doesn't say so in her bio, Kelly is one of my absolute favorite people.
Oh, I'm very flattered. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Imani. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So I'd love to get started. So Kelly, could you start by introducing yourself and explain a bit about the work that you do at the Commission, and then what you all have going on right now?
Sure. So I work at the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. We are a city department. We're the city civil rights department. And we're primarily tasked with enforcing the city's human rights and fair housing ordinances. And we do that primarily through investigating and adjudicating discrimination complaints in employment, housing, and public accommodations. We have about 16 protected classes. I won't go through them all, but they include race, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity, religion, source of income, age if it's over 40, military status, and plenty of others. So if someone finds they've been discriminated against, they can actually file a complaint with our office, and that complaint will be investigated. So that's one thing we do. Something else we do is advocate for victims of hate crimes. And we do that by accompanying people to court hearings, sometimes assisting in the filing of a complaint, with the police department. Not everyone wants to do that. Community and police relations, can be tricky. But for those who want to do that, we can assist with that process. We also offer some referral services to counseling services, pro bono legal resources, and those things. So that's our hate crime victim advocacy work. And then we also mediate conflict in neighborhood communities. So we have some skilled mediators on our team who do that. So that's the full scope of our work. And we're located at 740 North Sedgwick Street at Sedgwick and Superior, and on the 4th floor. And people can reach us via email, info@cchr.org, and our number is 312-744-4111.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. That's always really helpful to hear. I don't think sometimes people realize how many services that you all offer. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. We're here to serve.
Yes. But in addition to working for the Commission, you also host a monthly podcast at Affinity.
Yes. Oh, I love it. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it is for us too. Thank you. And I want to talk to you a bit about that. How long had you thought about hosting a podcast? I mean, it very much falls in line with things that you're good at. It's very, very good. But how long did you think about, of course, oh my goodness, I love it. How long did you think about hosting it, and what did you hope would come from your hosting a podcast?
I have thought about doing a podcast for about 3 years. And for 3 years prior, about 3 years before I approached you. And I've always loved radio. Ever since I was really little. My father was into radio. He had favorite radio shows, things he liked to listen to, talk radio about politics and culture, and radio soap operas and mysteries and those kinds of things. So I always loved radio. And I like having meaningful, soulful conversations with people about their lives, their perspectives, ideas, backgrounds, and I like to talk about people, places, and things. And so a few years ago, I participated in a leadership program called Impact. And it's a leadership development program that's a partnership between the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and the Chicago Urban League. And one of the things that we had to do toward the end of the program is draft a leadership development plan. Like, what are some things that we're really excited about? What are ways we want to develop ourselves? What are some things that we want to bring into fruition? Yeah. So for me, that was this podcast. But I kept thinking about it, but I thought, okay, I need to stop thinking about it and actually actualize it. And so that's why I wanted to approach you. I said, I really want to have these deep conversations, and I want to host something. I want to create a space where I can take a deep dive with people into issues and experiences that are on people's minds and hearts. And that's why I thought Affinity would be a perfect collaborator.
That's lovely. Well, thank you so much. That actually kind of leads into our next question. Like I said, I love the podcast. It's great. You're great. Love hearing it, and love to see what you come up with. And when you came to me with this idea, you were really clear that you wanted to work with Affinity in this. And I wanted to ask you, because I didn't ask you at the time, why was it so important for you to work with Affinity? There's a zillion ways to do a podcast. You don't need to work with Affinity at all, and but you wanted to, and I wanted to find out more about that.
Yes, so I definitely was excited about working with Affinity, and it's because the podcast, Living Room Chats at Affinity, a podcast for brave conversations and bold voices, it's actually, I wanted to work with Affinity because Affinity is such an important part, has been such an important part of my life. I came out, I realized I was gay when I was in college. And that was a painful time for me. It was exciting because I went to Wellesley College for undergrad, and it was a very affirming place for me to be gay. That was wonderful. But then, some of my family members just were not accepting, and so some of those relationships were fractured for a while. And after I graduated college and came back to Chicago, I was looking for community and looking for a space and relationships and an organization or some place where a community of people I could be a part of. And when I came to Affinity, I just remember how warm and inviting it was. And over time, I started going to events and activities here and there, and I really liked it. I loved the mission. I liked the people. I felt like I could be myself. And then I started volunteering on a few different committees, and then I wound up serving on the board for a few years and that kind of thing. So I became more and more a part of the organization. And I thought Affinity would be a great collaborating partner because here it is, I want to have this podcast for brave with bold people, brave conversations with bold voices. And Affinity was such an integral part to helping me further develop my voice and to be bolder and courageous. And it's I like the mission of Affinity in terms of what it doesn't just address LGBTQ issues, but it values people and their experiences and perspectives. So I thought that kind of, that sense of mission was right in alignment with my values and my mission for the podcast.
That's so flattering. Thank you so much for thoughtful answering and for, just your kind words about Affinity,
It's true.
I'm not lost. You're definitely one of us. So,
Yes, yeah.
Really, really appreciate you and this podcast. It's lovely. I feel like it brings so much too, and a unique perspective, and we get to talk about things that we might not talk about in a group conversation, so that's pretty amazing.
It's so much fun. I love it. I look forward to the third Wednesday of each month. It's this is so much fun. I get to actually have these incredible conversations with such dynamic, interesting people. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love watching it as well. I want to ask you too about sort of your own style. So I love hearing more about your guests, and I also love it's different every time. But I was wondering if you could share a bit of the magic that how you figure out when you're working with someone how much you share and how much you listen. And I always think about that. I think about that on this show as well. How much do I share and how much do I listen? And I was wondering, how do you navigate that? What is the magic for you? How do you make that work? And what do you think works best?
It's funny. I think that so I do prepare for the podcast, right? So prepare by long time ago, I secured my conversation buddies. I call them my conversation buddies. I can call them guests, but I like combo buddies, right?
That's cute.
Plan that out ahead. And then before the podcast, we have a check-in where, I remind them of the mission of the podcast, all of the logistical stuff, but also work with them on shaping the conversation. Because I think that makes things go better and they feel more a part of it, if you will. So we shape the conversation together. I talk about some things I'm interested in asking them or I'm interested in talking about. I ask them how they feel about that. I ask them if there are certain things that are off limits. So I say all that to say there's some prep that goes into that. However, during the conversation, since the prep has been had, these are individuals I know some more than others, but people I usually know well enough. We have a level of comfort. A lot of it is just what happens in the moment of the conversation. So there's nothing that's scripted. And in terms of, when to speak, when not to speak and that kind of thing, it just depends on the person. I find that each person is different. And so no two conversations will be the same. And I find that if someone is really, I can tell that they're really sharing something and opening up, and it's really compelling and interesting, or they're excited about something, or, by their response, that sort of shapes whether or not I sort of interject, or whether I add something that I'm thinking, or whether there's some good stuff here. Let this person, let me not interrupt the flow. So I think it's some of the best conversations are, yes, where preparation occurs, but they're organic and they unfold. And I don't want to recede in the background, but I also don't want to get in the way. So.
I think you do a really great job about that, and it is interesting how you speak more than others sometimes, but it's always such a lovely conversation.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah. So what has been your favorite moment on the podcast?
Oh, wow.
And why?
Wow, a favorite moment. It's so hard because there's so many moments that have just been so fun. It's almost hard to choose a favorite one, but I have to say probably one of my favorite moments was the launch. The launch in February. Because I said, oh my goodness, I'm finally doing it. Yeah. Here it is. I've been thinking about this podcast for 3 years. I developed it. I have guests. I have there's a logo with Affinity, title, all of that kind of stuff. And here we are in the living room in front of a live audience. I can't believe it's happening. So I think probably one of my favorite moments was the launch date in February. And my first guest was Sia Williams, and that was just incredible because Sia was with Affinity as a scholar several years ago. So that was wonderful. And then afterwards there was the celebration after the launch, and what I loved was seeing the audience members talking to each other and having a good time, and people who didn't know each other were hanging out and milling about. And so I like the kind of camaraderie from the audience, the live audience, and I appreciate the participation and people commenting and asking questions via the live stream. So I like that kind of engagement. So that was one of my favorites.
That was really nice, and I'm glad that we continue to have a live audience there and have a chance to ask questions, because I was really concerned about that. I didn't know if it would be making too much noise, and it's really lovely. I'm so glad you suggested it.
Because it's the living room.
Exactly.
And as a matter of fact, I can't take full credit for that. Initially, remember we had talked about it, that there's going to be a live audience for the launch, but then after the launch, it would just be live stream.
Right.
And there were actually a couple people there, one of them being a dear friend of mine, Yvonne, who said, you should really think about the live audience just being the live audience for every podcast, and whoever shows up, you know. And the showing up has been great. Participation, sometimes there are some people more than others. At certain times, it's all great, but I really like that energy in the living room, and it makes it very cozy and intimate. So it works really well.
Yeah, I've been to all of them live except once. I was out of the country for my birthday, and I tuned in.
I was like, oh my gosh, she's celebrating her birthday, and you were still tuning in. I was like, that Imani is so dedicated.
Oh my goodness, no, it was my pleasure. It was my absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of favorite moments and just really heard a lot of just gems from your guests. And I'm wondering, has anyone said anything that's changed the way that you think or the way that you walk through the world?
Wow, that's a really bold and brave question.
Got to bring it, you
Yeah,
know?
I love it. I love it. You know, one of the things that I ask each convo buddy at the end of each podcast is, what does living a bold and brave life mean to you? And I ask them that because of basically the mission of the podcast and the title. Like the second part of the title, podcast for brave conversations and bold voices. So I ask each convo buddy, what does a bold and brave life mean to you? What does that look like for you? And there's a common thread that has run through several of the responses that people have given, but there's a response that someone said that I found incredibly profound. Said, living a bold and brave life means for me standing in my truth and knowing that no matter how hard it is to be in certain spaces and how I'm perceived, that I deserve to be there, even if it's uncomfortable. So just standing and taking ownership and embracing that I'm here and I deserve to be here.
Yeah.
My life has value and worth. I have something to bring to the table.
Yeah.
That was such a profound moment, because I do think there are so many individuals as well as groups of people who are made to feel or made to think that they are less worthy, less deserving, that they don't really have anything to contribute, anything to say. And I think that it's very stressful. Life is stressful. Life is hard for many people. And to just embrace your humanity, which is what embrace your own humanity. See the dignity of your life. And then strive to see the dignity in others. That was the other thing that, the guest said. And I thought that, wow, that was really very profound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That is a good one. I was expecting that.
Yep.
So I also want to know, I know a lot of people that want to start a podcast and think about it. And I'm wondering, can you share anything about what it's like to start a podcast and share anything that you think you wish someone would have told you or you wish you would have known when you started?
That's a good question. Another one. So what I can share with people starting a podcast is not to feel like everything has to be perfect and you have every I dotted and every T crossed. I mean, you want to have an idea of sort of why you want to start a podcast, what your overall mission is, like what are some topics that interest you. So yes, there are certain things that you want to have clarity about, but it's constantly unfolding and evolving. Like I'm already thinking, maybe next year there might be a few podcast episodes that are devoted much more around a single subject.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like, so not every podcast, but maybe there's some podcasts we're going to specifically be talking about this topic or this issue, maybe mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be something that's evolving or things that you might want to, change or develop and that kind of thing, but not to allow, all of these unknowns or perfection stop you from starting. So that's what I would, that's a word of encouragement. If you feel compelled to start a podcast, know why you want to, and I would say, some people worry about, well, how do I make my podcast interesting? And I think that, of course, you want to think about audience and engagement and, visuals and those kinds of things, that communicate a consistent message. But I would say, for me, I find that it's not hard for me to make it interesting because I'm interested in the people in front of me. The person right in front of me. I'm interested in people. I'm curious about their lives. I'm curious about ideas. And I think if you have curiosity and if you really respect the person that you're talking to, you put some time in the preparation, you're open to input and feedback, positive and negative, from people you respect, whether it's on the types of questions you ask, the length of time, the setup and all of those things. If you're open to input and feedback, then, you can develop it and make it better and better and better. So I would say also be open to input and feedback from people you trust. Don't keep delaying because you want it to be perfect. It's okay. Like have the nuts and bolts and then get started. And stay curious. I think if you're curious, you'll always be engaged. So those are some things. Now, some things that I could really improve on is really something I want to do is create a website that will be a repository for some of my writings and reflections as well as the podcasts, where I have that people can check out on my site the podcasts that, Living Room Chats at Affinity podcast and other reflections and things like that. So I really want to create that so that I have something of my own. And also, not just visually, but also like someone told me about this free platform where you can upload your podcast's audio. So for people who might want to tune in only to the audio and not feel like they have to have the Facebook app open, to listen to it, I'd love to have something on another platform so that the people can just listen to the podcast and not feel like they have to watch it to listen to it. So those are some things that I'll be developing.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Because I do know several people that are really interested in starting a podcast and feel like it's really outside of the things that they're able to do. So, and it's nice thinking that there will be more voices, that we can listen to in these ways.
And and the other thing too is if you want to start your podcast and you're sort of curious, listen to other podcasts, and it's not to copy and paste or anything, but it's sort of interesting to, listen to or watch how people do their own podcasts, like what they choose to focus on, what their style is. Is it a podcast of just them talking about an issue, or do they interview a person? Do they speak with a group of people at a time? What's their setup like? And so it's a really fun thing to do to listen to other podcasts.
That's it. And just quickly, are there some podcasts that you like?
Oh gosh, there's several I like. Of course, I love the. I like the TED. Oh, I shouldn't say of course. I like the TED Radio Hour. I enjoy. There's a podcast of Maria Shriver's called Meaningful Conversations. I like Freakonomics podcast. There's also a podcast. It's with two queer-identified Black biracial people who are with the New York Times. And they started their podcast after the 2016 election. And I'm trying to remember...
Wait, is it the Read?
No, I like that one too. I like the Read, that's one. But this is another one.
Okay.
But this is another one. I can't remember the name of it, but I love that podcast. And they're millennials and queer-identified Black folks who talk about all kinds of social and political and racial issues. I love that one. There are just so many I could name. The Broad Experience. I mean, just about work life and women and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of podcasts I listen to.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So last question, is there anything that you haven't shared? Last word is yours. You want to know?
Well, first I just want to say I want to thank Affinity for, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I always enjoy talking to you. You're one of my favorite people as well. So I enjoy our conversations. And I just want to say, I'm very grateful to be a part of the Affinity family and the community. I started out at Affinity in my 20s, and I will be 41 in August.
My
and
goodness.
so for me to be part of the Affinity for this number of years is very meaningful to me, and to be able to collaborate on a podcast that is just super meaningful to me and means a lot. So I want to thank you.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
That's so good.
And the Affinity Board.
Oh my goodness. The pleasure really is ours. I'm so thrilled about the podcast. We've heard wonderful, wonderful feedback. And I love being there as well. It's been lovely to watch.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. That is actually right at our time. Wonderful job. So, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you. If you want to find out more about Kelly, you can find her on Facebook at Kelly Suzanne Salisbury, or on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is Kellzoe, Kellzoe on Twitter. So you can find her there. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Remember, Affinity hosts this show the fourth Friday of the month. You can find out more about us at our website, affinity95.org. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful Friday. Good night, Mom.